Texas just got its answer. The Rangers went to Houston this weekend, with the American League West still sitting there, close enough to reach, and the trade deadline less than 48 hours away. It was 3 games against a division rival. Nathan Eovaldi was on Friday. Jacob deGrom was on Saturday. There was one last chance on Sunday to salvage the series, but Houston took all 3. 23 runs for the Astros and 9 for the Rangers. Texas leaves Houston 55-57, losers of 5 straight. Houston leaves 58-55, winners of 6 straight, with control of the American League West. And now the Rangers have a decision to make. Not because one series tells us everything about a baseball team. It doesn't. But because Monday at 6 o'clock Eastern, the ability to change your mind disappears. The market closes. There is no more checking in. There is no more waiting for the price to come down. There's no more saying, we'll see where we are tomorrow. And I think this deadline has exposed one of the strangest things about the expanded playoff era. A lot of teams are close enough to October. Far fewer have shown that they're good enough to spend heavily trying to get there. The Dodgers know what they are. Milwaukee knows. Tampa Bay knows. And Atlanta knows exactly what they are. But then there's another group sitting around 500, looking at the wild card standings and seeing an opportunity when maybe they should be seeing leverage. Minnesota, Texas, Toronto, the 3 come to mind. Maybe another club changes its mind before Monday afternoon. Because this is a seller's market now. Starting pitchers are disappearing. Impact bats are scarce. Catches are getting interesting. There's too many teams shopping and not enough players worth buying. So if I'm running a mediocre baseball team with something the real contenders desperately need, I'm asking a different question. Why am I shopping with them? Maybe I should be selling to them. The standings don't lie, and the box scores don't either. I'm Pete Dwyer, and this is the Division Line from the Baseball Nerd. 6 divisions, 30 teams, in one weekly breakdown of what the numbers actually say. And with hours remaining before the trade deadline, we're figuring out which teams have actually earned the right to buy. I don't want to spend this entire show on the Rangers, but that Houston series gives us a perfect starting point for everything we're going to talk about. Texas is 55-57. They've scored 465 runs this year and allowed 501, minus 36. The Pythagorean formula, their expected record, is 52-60. Against teams at 500 or better, Texas is 24-34. Then there's Houston, 58-55 with 6 straight wins. 9-1 in the last 10 games. While Houston's minus 27 run differential remains a legitimate warning sign, the Astros are 24-15 against teams at 500 or better. That's a pretty dramatic contrast between 2 teams fighting for the same division. Texas already acquired Logan O'Hoppe and Chase Silseth from the Angels. I don't hate that deal. The price was reasonable, and it gives them catching and pitching depth. Fine. But what I would question is treating that move as the beginning of some enormous Monday shopping spree. Houston just gave Texas more information. Hopefully the front office uses it. That's enough Rangers. Because they're one example of a league-wide problem. I went through the entire tracker for MLB before recording this because the rumor cycle has become almost useless. Who's interested? Who's checking in? Who's monitoring? Who might listen? Forget all that for a minute. Let's get into what actually happened. As of Sunday evening, when I'm recording this, the 2nd of August, there are 25 completed trades. Back on July 10th, Pittsburgh got re-record in 3, 2, 1. Back on July 10th, Pittsburgh acquired Jacob Gonzalez and Brandon Eiser from the White Sox. Chicago got a competitive balance A pick and left-hander Jaden Woods. Minnesota made its first addition that same day, acquiring Tommy Nance and international bonus pool money from Toronto for catcher Ryan Sprock. On July 14th, the Red Sox acquired Jahmai Jones from Detroit for a player to be named later. On July 15th, Milwaukee got Lance McCullers Jr., Colton Gordon, and Cash from Houston. Jaden Fielder went to the Astros. On July 18th, the Cubs acquired Aaron Civale from the Athletics for Aiden Moffett. On the 20th, the Dodgers got Seth Halverson from Colorado. The Rockies received Landon Vidorik and Nick Frasso. On the 22nd, Kansas City acquired Nate Pearson from Houston from Max Martin. On July 23rd, Pittsburgh acquired Ron Marinaccio from San Diego for international bonus pool money. July 25th gave us 2 more. The Red Sox got Curtis Mead from Washington for Connolly Early. We all know what happened with that one. Philadelphia picked up Cameron Miser from Kansas City for cash. On the 26th, the White Sox acquired Jose Urquidy from Pittsburgh for Felix Doroteo. The Athletics acquired Scott Blewett from St. Louis for cash. On the 27th, Pittsburgh added Jonathan Rodriguez from Baltimore for cash. 29th, Texas got into it with Logan O'Hoppe and Chase Silseth. Angel Arredondo went to the Angels. On July 30th, Minnesota bought again. A.J. Minter came over from the Mets. New York got Bruin Agbayani and Billy Amick. Baltimore acquired Jake Rogers from Detroit for Zane Barnhart. On the 31st, Minnesota, for a third time, got into it. Dean Kramer came over from Baltimore for Jonardo Reyes. Then August arrived, and the deadline changed. The Dodgers got Tarik Skubal. No surprise. Detroit receives Zahir Ope, River Ryan, and Brady Smith for Tarik Skubal. Pretty good upside. The White Sox got Luis Castillo. Seattle received Sir Anthony Dominguez, Nolan Jones, and Boston Smith. Atlanta acquired Lane Thomas and Bailey Falter from Kansas City, with Lucas Braun and Carter Holton going back to the Royals. Pittsburgh acquired Camilo Doval from the Yankees. New York received Omar Alfonso and Luis Cruz. Milwaukee acquired Bo Naylor and Cody Hauer from Cleveland for Craig Yauho and Blake Perkins. Then Sunday. You can tell it's getting real. Tampa Bay acquired Freddie Peralta from the Mets for Aiden Smith, Derrick Hill, and Emilian Petrie. Toronto acquired Jamison Taillon plus cash from the Cubs for a player to be named later, or cash. And now the Yankees have acquired Luis Garcia Jr. from Washington. The Nationals got 4 right-handers: Giovanni Cruz, Jake Bird, Jack Siebert, and Ben Grable. That's 25 trades up until the trading deadline on Monday. We still have a day left. And the last part matters, because look at the starting pitchers that are already gone: Skubal, Peralta, Castillo, Taillon, Kramer. And every one of them that came off the board changes what the next one costs. Skubal's a Dodger. That's the kind of sentence that makes every other National League general manager stare at his phone. The Dodgers are 69-42 with a plus 154 run differential. Their expected record is 71-40. They didn't acquire Skubal hoping he could rescue the season. They acquired him because they expect to play in October, and they want him starting the biggest games when they get there. Detroit got 3 pieces: Fairly expensive for a rental, but it also makes sense. A prospect represents the possibility of future value. For the Dodgers right now, October innings carry enormous present value. This is one of the things I kept coming back to while writing about the deadline this week. Rental math and controllable player math are different equations. Los Angeles can justify paying for 60 games plus October because October is already built into the expectation. Los Angeles also has the potential of turning Tarik Skubal not into a rental, but into a long-term asset for the club. There's not many other teams that have the ability to do what the Dodgers are doing. Why is not the point of this show. They just do. But getting back to this, with Los Angeles expecting to play in October, as they should be, that's one part of the equation. A team sitting below 500 has a very different equation. Then Freddie Peralta went to Tampa Bay. I like this trade. Partly because Tampa Bay has earned the ability to push. They're 65-46. I've been talking about them. We also talked about Peralta before the trade. When I wrote about him, his ERA was sitting at 5.01. You could stop there and decide that you don't want anything to do with him, and that's understandable. But then we started looking deeper. The expected weighted on-base average against him was 303. His actual weighted on-base average was 342. His barrel rate allowed was 5.4%. His hard hit rate was 38.7%. The whiff rate was 26.6%. The results looked bad, but the stuff underneath them looked far better. My argument, and still is, was that Peralta could still be a Game 2 October starter in the right environment. Tampa Bay just paid 3 prospects to test that theory. That's the type of deadline purchase I love to see. You're not buying a name. You're buying a profile that you believe the market has mispriced. And I've spent a lot of time on mispriced players in this market and in the overall MLB this year. This is the point where we need the standings because the deadline strategy makes no sense without them. Tampa Bay leads the American League East at 65-46. The Yankees are 63-49. Boston is 59-51. Those 3 clubs can justify improvement. Chicago leads the American League Central at 59-52. Cleveland and Minnesota entered their late Sunday games at 56-56. We know that the American League West changed dramatically this weekend. Houston is 58-55. Texas 55-57. In Seattle, they're 54-58. Seattle's already looking to sell. They see the writing on the wall. There's no illusions of grandeur with Jerry Dipoto right now. He knows what they are. They have assets. They're leveraging those assets to build. In the National League, Milwaukee and Los Angeles both entered the end of Sunday with 69 wins. Atlanta's got 67. The Cubs have 63. Arizona entered Sunday with 59. The Phillies are 58. San Diego's 57. Miami 58. That's a lot of teams that are alive. But now let's look at the run differentials. Milwaukee, plus 138. Dodgers, 154. Atlanta, 108. The Cubs, 89. The Yankees, 87. Boston, 56. Chicago, 55. Those are teams where the record and the run profile are giving you substantial evidence that they should be buyers. Minnesota, minus 28. Texas, minus 36. Toronto, minus 58. Phillies, minus 12. San Diego, minus 13. The standings tell you who can reach October, but they do not automatically tell you who should spend heavily trying to get to October. Chicago is the kind of club where I understand the aggression. They're 59 and 52. They're plus 55. They're underplaying their expected record, which is 61 and 50. Jose Urquidy makes sense. Luis Castillo makes sense as a bet. You can debate Castillo specifically because his season hasn't been clean. But I get what the White Sox front office sees. They already have something worth supplementing. Chicago and Minnesota are separated by only a few games. Their underlying profiles are nowhere near as close. Deadline decisions based purely on games back bother me immensely. The Twins have already made 3 additions. Tommy Nance, AJ Minter, and Dean Kramer. And I like Minter. I was touting his accomplishments before the Twins got him. The 3-batter minimum created more value for a lefty capable of getting the lefty he entered to face and still remain effective against the right-handed hitter behind him. That's an October skill. So my issue isn't with AJ Minter. My issue is, why are the Twins spending capo? The Twins entered Sunday at 500 with a minus 28 run differential. I know I keep coming back to that, but it is important. Their expected record is 53 and 59. They are hanging around. There's a huge difference between hanging around and building something that I want to invest heavily in. Minnesota sits in a seat where they have exactly what the market wants. They have Joe Ryan and they have Ryan Jeffers. MLB.com identified both as premium potential trade assets and specifically questioned whether Minnesota's current roster has enough upside to justify holding them rather than using this market to build forward. Joe Ryan is controlled through 27, which means his trade value changes dramatically if Minnesota waits until next summer and sells him as a rental. Think about the market around Joe Ryan on Monday morning. Again, Skubal's gone, Peralta's gone, Castillo's gone. Every contender that called those teams and lost still needs pitching. The Brewers come to mind. What does Joe Ryan cost now? That would be worth finding out. Minnesota doesn't need to do a scorched earth rebuild. They just don't. You keep the players you want on the next good Twins team. But if somebody offers an absurd package because the clock is running and the alternatives keep disappearing, take advantage of it. To blatantly say you're not selling at 500, the same thing with Jeffers. The catching market is desperate. You cannot reproduce deadline desperation in December. This is really the argument under this entire episode. Coming out of the All-Star break, this is staggering. 23 of MLB's 30 teams were within 4 games of a potential postseason spot. That's great for fans. It is dangerous for front offices because now almost everybody can build an argument for buying. We're 3 out. We're 4 out. We go hot for a week and we're in. That's all true. Now ask the second set of questions. Have you outscored your opponents? What does your expected record say? How have you played against quality competition? What happens when your schedule gets harder? Is the player you're acquiring fixing the actual reason you're losing? And if he does, how much are you going to give up? Another great example is the Pirates. They came into Sunday around 500. They have a positive run differential. Their expected record is stronger than its actual record. And there's an argument that the Pirates have played better baseball than the standings suggest. The Twins are the other side of that coin. Same general neighborhood in the standings, completely different underlying case. That's why the 3 games out can't be the entire analysis. So who should be buying? Los Angeles? Yeah. Milwaukee? Absolutely. Atlanta? Yes. The Cubs can. The Yankees should. Boston should. Tampa already did. The White Sox? Yes. Those clubs have either elite records, strong underlying profiles, or both. But now I start raising the threshold. Minnesota needs to convince me. Texas already has. They should be sellers. Any discussion of buying coming out of Arlington is, well, insanity. Toronto, just sell. Build up for next year. They got Jameson Taillon. I don't think Toronto emptied its farm system for that, and that's okay. But you make another move where you give up prospects because you're only 3 games back. That's where the wild card standings can seduce you and make you do really dumb things. Being alive, being right there in the standings doesn't make you dangerous. These are teams playing mediocre baseball at best that still have a path to the postseason because somebody has to be in those spots. That does not mean because you're in that spot, you should spend future value, players that you have poured into to teach your system and your design with your coaches, that you're going to have walk away for something that you might get if things go right. This may be the most interesting part of Monday, the thing that hasn't happened yet. Because for all the movement we've had, there are still names that are sitting on the board that could change the deadline again. The first one that comes to mind is George Kirby in Seattle. Seattle already traded Luis Castillo. A lot of reporting around that other teams have become more aggressive and asking about Kirby. Hunter Green from the Reds. Cincinnati's still listening, and reports had the chances of a deal somewhere around 50-50 coming into Sunday. The Angels have a few players that can make them have a big say in the deadline in the final hours. Reed Detmers, Jose Soriano, Zach Neto. Other clubs reportedly believe at least 2 of those players could move. I've heard all 3. Boston has been talking with the Angels about Neto. Boston needs a shortstop. That one should happen. Then there's Baltimore. This could get weird. Adley Rutschman is drawing serious interest. Taylor Ward is drawing interest. Rutschman is controlled through 2027, so we're kind of not on the rental topic on this one. And the rumor board puts executives citing the possibility of an Adley deal much higher than I would have expected a month. If Rutschman moves, the catcher market changes immediately. And then one of my favorite players, Luis Arraez. The Tampa Bay Rays, Texas Rangers, and the Phillies are reportedly involved. I wrote about Arraez this week. His skill is extremely specific. He doesn't strike out, he controls the barrel, and he makes defense finish plays. For the right lineup, that changes innings. But for the wrong lineup, You can spend prospect capital adding a skill you already have, while the real reason you struggle remains untouched. Fit matters, maybe more at this deadline than name recognition. Let's get into the market. It's feeding itself. This is basic economics designed as baseball. Skubal was available, now he's not. Peralta was available, now he's not. It goes down the list. The number of contenders looking for pitching didn't disappear with them. So the remaining starting pitching is now really valuable. If one moves, the next guy becomes more valuable. And the cycle continues. Eventually, somebody looks at a pitcher they valued at one prospect on Thursday and gives up 2 on Monday because the clock is running. This goes back to the bubble teams. Who's selling, who's buying, who should be, who shouldn't be. If I'm running one of the bubble teams, for the argument's sake of the show, Texas, Minnesota, Toronto, I'm answering every phone call on everyone. You don't have to make the trade. Listening doesn't commit you to selling. Set something ridiculous. Hey, I'm the Yankees, and I'm calling Texas to ask about Jacob deGrom. 6 prospects. Okay? Maybe somebody pays it. If nobody does, you keep the player. But if another general manager is willing to sacrifice future value because he believes his team can win the World Series right now, that's the kind of urgency a 500 team should exploit. So I keep coming back to the same thing while writing a couple deadline articles this week. How much of a real player do you want to hand over for 2 months of somebody else's? Which is the uncomfortable part of these trades. You send a 21-year-old who might be starting for your organization in 2029. The player you acquire is gone when the season's over. Maybe there's a banner that hangs up because he was there. Maybe your season ends 3 games into October and you spend the winter watching your former prospect climb somebody else's rankings. There is no universal answer. Skubal can be worth that cost to the Dodgers, but like I said, they have the potential to make him a long-term piece of that team. Peralta can be worth that cost to Tampa. Again, Tampa Bay has the ability to make Peralta a long-standing member of that team. A.G. Minter can be worth more to one roster than another. Arias can completely change one lineup and barely move another. But what does the player actually fix? That should be the first question. What does he cost? That comes immediately after. And now let's get to Monday. I think starting pitching is going to get really expensive. That's easy. There are still serious contenders looking for innings, and 3 major starters have already left the board. I think somebody we currently describe as a buyer sells something meaningful. Maybe not a full organizational pivot. It doesn't need to be. The buyer and seller labels are useful for television graphics only. Real roster construction is a lot more complicated. You can sell one veteran at an inflated price and buy another player whose market you think is soft. And I think at least one contender panics. Their first choice is going to disappear. Second choice is going to be gone. It's 4:15. GM looks at the clock. The seller's asking for one more prospect. That's how a player who was off limits on Sunday ends up in another organization on Monday night. And I think the catcher market can get absolutely wild if Baltimore actually moves Adley Rutschman. I do think the downstream effect of the Dodgers getting Skubal forces a response somewhere in the National League. Likely from Milwaukee, possibly from Atlanta. The Cubs saw it. The Phillies saw it. Nobody can answer Tarik Skubal by acquiring another Tarik Skubal because there isn't one. But somebody will decide that the Dodgers getting better means its own roster needs to improve also. And sellers, they know that too. Monday at 6 Eastern is a deadline. December 1st is another deadline. The current collective bargaining agreement expires. On Tuesday, I'm publishing something on the Baseball Nerd that took me somewhere I did not expect when I started researching it. The headline? Relax. Baseball is coming back in 2027. The owners just can't afford not to play it. Every conversation about the next labor fight eventually lands in the same place. 1994, no World Series. The season stopped. Here we go again. I've spent the better part of the last 2 weeks going through the history of baseball's labor stoppages. And I came across something that changed the way that I'm looking at this. I found a Fitch ratings file. And when you put the labor stoppages together with a Fitch ratings file, 2027 really does look different. So a little bit, and I cover this in the article, but MLB has had 4 owner-initiated lockouts in the modern labor era: 1973, 1974, 1975, and 21 into 22. 0 regular season games lost from these 4 lockouts. Doesn't mean that there hasn't been labor damage. There has. 1981 was ugly. 1994 was catastrophic. Something very different about those. Those were player strikes. The players said, no more. Walked off the field, took their bats, and went home. The expected mechanism for December 1st, 2026 is an owner-initiated lockout. Ownership chooses when the lockout begins. Ownership chooses when the lockout ends. That distinction matters. Okay, now let's get into this Fitch thing. In April, Major League Baseball Trust increased its per-club borrowing limit from $125 million to $150 million. Across 30 organizations, that's roughly $750 million in additional borrowing capacity tied to the national revenue structure. Now, let's look at television. The national media business surrounding baseball doesn't look anything like 1994. The article goes pretty deep into this, but the short version, the tease, if you will, is the current guaranteed national rights revenue in 2026 is approaching $2 billion annually. MLB also structured its latest media arrangements around another trip to the media marketplace in 2029. There is a provision in those agreements that can extend the current package if enough regular season games disappear in a work stoppage. Okay, now let's think about the incentive. Owners lose money when games disappear. Then they can potentially delay the opportunity to renegotiate the next media package too. Now add the other side. Ownership has reportedly built a roughly $2 billion reserve for this labor fight. That makes me think the winter could get uglier because the individual clubs have a cushion to fall back on. They can sit longer. There's less immediate cash pressure, forcing somebody back to the table. This isn't going to be a quiet winter. There will be a lockout. It will get nasty. And I think spring training could get uncomfortable if it happens on time, because the reserve fund that the owners have quietly built up gives them the ability to walk much closer to the edge. But what that $2 million does not do is it does not replace lost television revenue, and it doesn't eliminate the debt structure. It also doesn't remove the media rights problem once the regular season games are actually threatened. That's why my prediction is different from the panic that we're going to hear all winter. There will be a lockout. It is not 1994. This is an owner lockout. Every time the owners have locked out the players, regular season games get played. There might be some schedule compression. Spring training might be short, but the regular season games get played because there is a reason to play them. They have a financial interest in playing. $2 billion in a media deal is not something you walk away from. You don't need to trust that the owners love baseball enough to protect it. I don't. But I do trust that the owners who have built billion-dollar businesses, aside from MLB clubs, understand the financial incentive. That's what they're looking at. My article comes out on Tuesday. The argument will be there. Look for it. It should shed some light on what we think is going to happen in 2027. So once 6 o'clock passes on Monday afternoon, the speculation finally dies. Everybody's got to play with the roster they chose. And Monday night gives us a pretty good first look. Los Angeles goes to Wrigley. The Dodgers and Cubs, two clubs with legitimate October ambitions, start playing roughly 2 hours after the market closes. Houston gets Toronto, which is interesting for two completely different reasons. Texas gets San Francisco. For the Rangers, the interesting part may happen before the first pitch. But whatever Chris Young decides by 5 o'clock Central is the roster that Texas will take onto the field at 7:05. Minnesota gets a really useful week. 3 games in Kansas City starting on Tuesday. Then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday in Milwaukee. If the Twins believe this roster deserves deadline investment, there's your test. They're going to have the team that they're going to have when they play. They're going to find out when they play the team sitting on top of the sport. Next weekend, there's nothing hypothetical happening. The reinforcements are there. The only players the teams get are the ones that come back from injury. And then we get to decide and we get to watch which front office won. One more thing before we close. We touched on it last week. I'm going to again one more time. The Baseball Nerd now has 3 homes. The main site, thebaseballnerd.com. Substack, of course, where everything lives, is thebaseballnerd.substack.com. And now, the third home, The Baseball Nerd, is on Beehive, thebaseballnerd.beehive.com. All the deadline work, all the historical stories, all the analytics, the spark, the fade, the fantasy database, the division line, this podcast you're listening to, all of it keeps growing. And if you've been reading, listening, sharing, subscribing, or sending me a message explaining exactly why I'm wrong about your team, I truly appreciate it. There's a lot more coming. By 6 o'clock on Monday night, somebody is going to panic. I would almost guarantee it. Well, another pitcher's going to disappear, and then maybe another. And a team realizes its first choice is gone. And then the backup is gone. The clock matters. The seller knows it, and the price moves. We might spend the next 5 years looking at a prospect that got given away. And that's what makes this deadline interesting. These teams are spending future value because the present has extremely valuable consequences. The calculation gets harder when you're sitting at 500. There are some teams that shouldn't be in it. They have the opportunity to take somebody else's prospects, reload, and come back with a better roster. Making the playoffs is one goal, but building a team capable of surviving once it gets there, that's the job. Monday afternoon will tell us which front offices understand the difference. That's The Line. New episodes of The Division Line drop every Monday morning. Like, follow, and share the show. And you can find everything at thebaseballnerd.com. I'm Pete Dwyer, and I'll see you next Monday.